Good day. On this holiday, we begin this morning with the latest from Uvalde, Texas, on a holiday filled with confusion, frustration, and mourning. Local law enforcement is now the subject of a federal investigation. A look into how police responded to the shooting at Robb Elementary, which left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. The Justice Department will launch what's called a critical incident review into how law enforcement handled the mass shooting. Uvalde's mayor requested the review after the Texas Department of Public Safety admitted that officers responding to the shooting made a series of mistakes. It all comes after President Biden and the First Lady visited the town yesterday, meeting with the families of the victims who lost their lives in one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. NBC News correspondent Liz McLaughlin is on the ground in Uvalde this morning, and NBC News reporter Julia Jester is covering President Biden's movements from Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you to both of them for being with us. Liz, let's start with you. What can you tell us about this critical incident review that the Justice Department is now going to lead?
Well, Joe, these types of reviews are incredibly rare after a mass shooting. Only happened about a handful of times. And this is a substantial development as pressure mounts around this law enforcement reaction. Now, this is not potentially punitive federal action. This will be a report at the end of the review from the department's Office of Community-Oriented Policing with lessons learned and hopes of improving best practices in future active shooter situations. The decision, or the announcement rather, about this review came yesterday as Biden was meeting with victims' families, including the family of Eliana Torres, a 10-year-old born in 2012, the year of the Sandy Hook massacre. She was a bright young girl, lots of talents, loved dancing and softball. She wanted to be both a nurse and a lawyer when she grew up. Unfortunately, those dreams will never happen. Here's what her family had to say about this tragic loss.
It's devastating. You don't, when you see things like this on TV and some of the places, I mean, it hurts. You know what I mean? It's sad because you don't feel that pain until it happens to you.
It was like a part of me just fell off. It feels like I only have one piece of my heart now.
And that was her cousin there. Such a heartbreaking sentiment. Funerals for the 21 victims are set to begin tomorrow. Eliana Torres' family will have a funeral for her on Thursday. Joe?
A reminder, this impacts all generations. Julia, this was the president's second visit to a mass shooting site in less than 2 weeks. What can you tell us about his visit to Uvalde?
Good morning, Joe. President Biden had a pretty private visit to Uvalde. He spent most of the afternoon visiting with the victims' families and the survivors of the shooting. He was greeted by lawmakers and officials in Texas, and one of those, State Senator Roland Gutierrez, told MSNBC last night that the president assured him that he would be there for the community and offer any and all resources that they need. And as for how the community responded to President Biden's visit, he attended Mass yesterday at Sacred Heart Catholic Church, and as he was leaving, he approached a group of demonstrators who said, "Do something," to the president, and he mouthed to them, "We will." So from what he signaled to those demonstrators, and I'm sure what were some difficult conversations with those directly impacted by the shooting, as well as meeting with first responders and learning a bit more about the response to this shooting. President Biden has not commented publicly on, what he gathered from his visit yesterday, but it was deeply personal. As you said, he's no stranger to tragedy, being the nation's consoler in chief. Joe?
So, Liz, after the president's visit, how are those families of the victims holding up? And any reaction to the news that the federal government's now getting involved in reviewing what happened during the shooting?
Joe, a bit of mixed reaction, but this is an especially tough week for this community. I've been talking with mental health care workers here, Red Cross disaster relief, spiritual care volunteers who say now that these funerals are starting, the reality is setting in, emotions running high, anger, demands for change. Some families are hopeful about this federal probe, that it will lead to more action, more substantial change, but many are saying it's just not enough. demanding gun reform, something different than what we have right now, which is mass shooting after mass shooting. I spoke with teachers who were here at this Town Square Memorial yesterday from another community, a small, predominantly Hispanic community here in Texas, and it really hit home for them. These last names a little too familiar, those kids' faces looking like kids they taught, and they held up signs as Biden's motorcade passed that said teachers shouldn't be human shields, demanding gun reform now, and that's a message that we're hearing a lot in this community right now. Something has to change. Joe?
Liz McLaughlin and Julia Jester, thank you both. The Texas school shooting was front of mind on this week's Meet the Press. Texas State Senator Roland Gutierrez spoke about the police response, while Pat McCrory, the former governor of North Carolina, talked about the power of the gun lobbies in Republican politics. Here's a look at the highlights with MTP moderator Chuck Todd.
Well, good morning. On this week's Meet the Press, we were single issue. We focus on the mass shootings and the political impasse over gun laws. Will any member of Congress ever be voted out of office for being too pro-gun? I spoke with New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, former North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory, former Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, plus the Texas State Senator who represents Uvalde, Roland Gutierrez. Here are some of the most important answers from Meet the Press, compressed. You think someone should be held criminally account for the poor response?
Listen, I think certainly for me in Texas going forward, I don't know that there should be criminal negligence or anything like that, or criminal accountability. But we have to make sure that this never happens again, because you and I both know there's probably going to be one of these instances happen again in this state and others. We have to learn from this for sure.
There must be many things done, but we know background checks make a difference. We know gun licensing supported by the majority of Americans make a difference. Heck, when Connecticut did it, their gun violence rate fell 40%. When Missouri got rid of it, their gun violence rate raised 20%. So we know what works, but I am sorry. We are at a point in this nation where we are going to have to mobilize a greater movement. Just expressing regret or sorrow, until the redemptive power of the love for all of our children is greater than the destructive power of the love of our guns and money and power. Until that redemptive love of our children turns into action, then nothing is going to change. And so many generations before us knew this, as Frederick Douglass says. Power concedes nothing without a demand. If there's no struggle, there is no progress. We have got to begin to hold our congressional leaders more accountable for change.
I lost a primary 2 weeks ago to a congressman who had a gun in his front trousers in a commercial.
In every TV ad.
In every TV ad. And that was a more powerful message to the constituency voting in that primary. He was tougher, I was weaker, and yet my record of accomplishment in fighting crime is unsurpassed.
But it's about the gun, it's not about the record.
It's a symbolism. It's a symbolism. And right now we've got people who don't trust right now the criminal justice system. We're letting criminals go. You see the DAs in LA, the DAs in some of these cities where they're letting criminals go after crime after crime after crime. And people are going, you know, I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm going to protect my family. I'm going to protect my home. I'm going to protect myself in a car.
So what you're saying is
absolutely. The violence is a cultural problem that this country must face, and it's got to be common sense.
Our thanks to Chuck Todd for that recap. Now, after the tragedy in Uvalde, there are renewed calls for legislative action to prevent more school shootings. But the laws didn't change after Sandy Hook or Parkland, prompting many to question if this time will really be any different. Are there actually places where agreement can be found? NBC senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Hake takes a closer look.
From Newtown, Connecticut, the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary, an unthinkable attack on young children.
The murder of 26 people in a Newtown, Connecticut school in 2012 horrified the nation and seemed to galvanize it too. Something had to be done about guns.
I'm convinced cooperation and common sense will prevail.
But 10 years and 51 school shootings later, 94 more people have been shot and killed inside of U.S. schools, including the tragic loss of 19 children and 2 adults in Uvalde, Texas. Mass shootings are a uniquely American phenomenon, as a recent analysis published in the New York Times shows. For gun safety advocates, the reason is obvious. Americans have easier access to firearms than in any other developed nation and own more of them, with some 390 million thought to be in circulation. But attendees at the annual NRA convention in Houston this weekend don't see it that way.
It's mental illness, is how I see it. It's total mental illness.
It didn't occur to me to make a connection between this shooting and a gun.
The NRA and its roughly 5 million members form a small but vocal minority, highly motivated, easily mobilized, single-issue voters, advocating for a strict interpretation of the Second Amendment. Member Richard Welch thinks gun control advocates have the issue exactly backwards.
If they get in trouble, the first thing they're going to do is call 911 and pray that somebody shows up with a gun. And so the same thing that they're protesting outside is the same thing that they're going to pray for.
The NRA's system of rating candidates and politicians and spending heavily to support the best performers makes the organization a powerful friend to like-minded officials, says Paul Barrett, a journalist and author who writes about guns and politics.
Being insufficiently aggressively pro-gun rights is a potential hazard for any candidate in a red state.
Democrats have the most anti-gun ticket in history.
They can also be a dangerous enemy. The NRA's Political Action Committee spent $20 million in the 2020 election cycle, mostly on attack ads like this against Democratic politicians in battleground states.
John also wants to ban guns that most of us already own. These guys don't get it.
Candidates who have the NRA's backing, or those who want it, learn to speak the same language.
But our Second Amendment is not just about hunting. It's about our constitutional right to protect ourselves.
The Second Amendment is not about duck hunting. It's about protecting your family and your country.
After Newtown, gun safety advocates got organized too. And in 2020, the Everytown for Gun Safety Super PAC actually outspent the NRA, turning the tables on some of its endorsees.
Cory Gardner not only stands by Donald Trump, he also stands with the gun lobby.
Gardner lost to Democrat John Hickenlooper. As the debate shifts to focus on legislation expanding background checks and creating extreme risk protection or red flag laws, which let judges order guns removed from people deemed dangerous, polls show both have majority support nationwide. But as history has shown, that may not sway lawmakers, especially from battleground districts or states.
The gun issue is the number one motivator for many conservative voters. That simply isn't the case for lots of liberal voters.
Our thanks to Garrett Hake for that report. Let's talk about those polls. A new poll from Politico found 88% of Americans support requiring background checks for all gun sales, while 75% support a national gun sale database, and 84% support banning gun sales to those deemed dangerous by a mental health provider. In other news now, Russia's foreign minister says the, quote, liberation of Ukraine's Donbass is an unconditional priority for Moscow. Those comments come as fighting intensifies across eastern Ukraine. And this morning, the focus is on the key city of Severodonetsk in Luhansk. The region's governor says fighting there is very fierce, with Russian troops now on the outskirts of that city and moving in. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now from Bucha with the latest. And Molly, let's start with the latest in Severodonetsk. What is the latest over there? How is Russia's offensive in the broader Donbass going?
Hey, Joe, good morning. Look, as you said, that is the update of this morning, that Russian forces are now in the outskirts of Severodonetsk. Severodonetsk has been the focus of the fighting in the Donbass over the last week. It is the last city in that kind of horseshoe pocket. When you look at a map, it makes sense. It's kind of a cul-de-sac in the Donbass. It is the last city under Ukrainian control. 2 big points, though. Ukrainian military there says they are still fighting. They are still in control of that city. There are also a lot of civilians still there. Now, in addition to that update from the Luhansk regional governor, Joe, the Ukrainian military also says this morning that Russian forces are reinforcing their positions on some of the smaller villages in that area. So after they realized they couldn't just take Severodonetsk in one fell swoop, they have started to attack some of those smaller strategic villages to really incrementally encroach on that area, Joe.
So, Molly, yesterday, talk about another region, that's Kharkiv. President Zelensky, just as Russian forces started bombing the region again, he visited there following 2 weeks of relative quiet. This was his first official visit outside of Kyiv since the war started, right? What should we know about that?
Yeah, and it's a big deal. It's his first official visit outside the Kyiv area, we should say. He did, of course, visit Bucha, and the city, I should say, looked very, very different when President Zelensky was here. But he visited Kharkiv on Sunday with members of his presidential office, with members of his cabinet. He apparently went to some of the military, not frontline positions, but strategic positions, thanked soldiers there. He did also really say, he gave us a couple numbers that were important, Joe. He said that about a third of the territory in the wider Kharkiv region is still under Russian control. So really trying to kind of buoy, pep talk the troops that were there. He gave out some medals. And just after he left, Joe, Russia stepped up its bombardment. There were reports of explosions and shelling on the outskirts of the city just hours after the president left.
And Molly, we're also watching the captured southern city of Kherson. There have been reports that Ukrainian forces have actually launched a counteroffensive there. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was a game changer in the last kind of 72 hours. So Kherson is that southern city that really Russia took over very, very quickly. It was the first city they occupied. We spoke a lot about it a couple of months ago. But as the focus has really been, and specifically the Russian artillery focus has really been in the Donbass region, specifically around Severodonetsk, they're really focusing their forces there. It appears, according to military experts and people like the Institute of War who are tracking this so closely, that the Ukrainians were able to mount a counter-offensive and really disrupting Russian forces' ability there to kind of dig in and expand their positions on the already occupied areas. Joe?
Molly Hunter in Ukraine. Molly, thank you so much. Let's bring in Michael O'Hanlon. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Michael, good to have you with us on this Memorial Day. Thank you for joining us. So as we're seeing, Russian forces are making progress in the Donbass, and they're getting closer to capturing the entire Luhansk region. Now, over the weekend, President Zelensky said he didn't believe Ukraine would be able to restore all of its lost territory by military means, although we also know he's previously ruled out giving up territory in exchange for peace. Do you think Ukraine could be forced to do that, to give up some territory if it does want to end this war?
Greetings. Well, that's a good formulation, I think, by President Zelensky. It's very realistic. You know, previously I was worried that with the sense of momentum and the impressive accomplishments that we all applaud for the Ukrainians defending their capital and forcing Russia to more, modestly scale back its war aims now, that somehow Ukraine would have too much confidence and feel that it could take back the entirety of its territory. I just don't see that happening. Russia just has too much mass, too much artillery, even if it's not so impressive in its maneuver forces or its, high technology capability. So I think what the president's basically saying is it's going to have to happen through the use of coercion through economic means. In other words, some of the land can be taken back. Then hopefully Russia realizes it's not going to win a big new set of battles, so it gets more realistic. Then we start having peace talks that are a little bit more focused on the real issue, which is where will Russia leave? And I don't know if President Zelensky would tolerate Russia holding on to some small areas. I don't know if he would consider some kind of joint sovereignty or shared sovereignty or UN administered zones in Crimea or elsewhere. I think his ambitions are still to get back virtually all of the country, but at least he knows he can't do that through sheer force of arms, which I think is correct.
Talking more about the battle right now, over the last few weeks, we've seen a real push, a campaign by Ukraine for more advanced long-range weapons to help in its fight for the Donbass. Russia says the supply of such weapons would be a provocative escalation. Do you think the U.S. should provide these types of systems, especially if they could be used to strike targets inside Russia?
Well, you're right to be concerned. The United States is right to be concerned, but I also think there's a very good chance that Ukraine can be persuaded not to do that. And I think they should be supported in this request. It's getting to be pretty late to save certain parts of the country, but Russia's tactics of using artillery to just pound and pound away mean that you need some counter artillery systems from places that you can reliably use. And so if you're counting on an artillery tube that's only got a 20-mile range, then you've got to essentially be within combat radius of a lot of Russian weaponry to fire it. But if you can use an MLRS that has a range of many dozens of miles, then I think your chances are much better. Now, again, Ukraine should not get its hopes so high that it believes that just getting 50 or 100 of these longer range systems can somehow allow it to take back all of its territory. But what it can do is perhaps make the current fight, the current cities that are under targeting, maybe the last ones to fall that same way, or at least give Ukraine a chance. So yes, I would favor providing those weapons and then keeping a close eye on how they're used.
Michael O'Hanlon, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We always appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Let's get a check on your morning news now weather on a lot of folks' mind this Memorial Day. Michelle Grossman is with us. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, Joe. So great to see you. And unfortunately, today we're watching a really big system that's going to bring the chance of some dangerous weather throughout the Dakotas, also the state of Minnesota. It's a setup that could bring giant-size hail. That's a quote from the Severe Prediction Center. Also, some really gusty winds gusting near 80 miles per hour. We could see some long-track tornadoes. So we are expecting a severe weather outbreak. This is a story we're going to be watching all day long. We're already seeing some storms early this morning. We've been watching them really since yesterday evening. Now, on the backside of this system, you see blue. So we're looking at heavy snowfall in the northern Rockies. It's really unusual for this time of year. Lots of lightning, though, on the warm side of this system. As we zoom in a little closer, we do have a severe thunderstorm watch, and that will be the trend as we go throughout the day. We've seen a tornado watch as well. So 11 million at risk. Where you see that dark red, that's a moderate risk. That's 4 out of 5 on the scale. We really don't see it that often, and we're worried about the chance for strong long-track tornadoes. Baseball-size hail. We've already seen 6-inch size hail. That's about the size of a grapefruit. Also damaging winds to 80 miles per hour. And this threat really does stretch into the Central Plains as well. Now, as we go throughout tomorrow afternoon and evening, 12 million at risk. That threat kind of moves off to the east. It stretches down to the Southern Plains as well. And part of the problem is we have really cool air on the backside. We have expanding heat in the east. And we're looking at temperatures very summer-like in the east. Temperatures in the 80s and 90s. 90 degrees today in Chicago. Check out the East Coast. It's warm today. It's going to be summer-like once again tomorrow. 93 in New York City. 96 in Philadelphia. We're going to break some records, and 90 degrees in Rochester. So as we go throughout the end of the week, we're going to moderate back to average, but we do have some summer-like weather in the meantime. And in the meantime, we're going to watch this cold front moving through the east, bringing that severe weather today. Joe?
All right, lots to keep an eye on, Michelle. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.